page 83. Let's turn our songbooks to 83. 83. Glad to have everyone with us this morning. God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. He's so good to me. He cares for me. He cares for me. He cares for me. He's so good to me. I love Him so. I love Him so. I love Him so. He's so good to me. He answers prayer. He answers prayer. He answers prayer. He's so good to me. Luke 16, 14 through 18. Continue our study of the book of Luke, walking through chapter by chapter, verse by verse, thought by thought, before we go through the book of Luke. Luke 16, 14 through 18. The Pharisees and money. Last week we talked about money. This week we're talking about the Pharisees and money. Now each thing that Jesus says is things that we need to look at and think about, and he's this in a secondary sense is for us as well as them. There's a lesson to be learned here, even though he's using the Pharisees and things that are happening at that time. Luke 16, 14. Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, also heard all the things, and they derided him. And he said to them, "You are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your heart. For what is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in God's sight, in the sight of God." 16. The law and the prophets were until John. Since that time, the kingdom of God has been preached, and everyone is pressing into it. And it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one tittle of the law to fail. Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery, and whoever marries her who is divorced from her husband commits adultery. So as Jesus is preaching at this point, the Pharisees are there. He knows what he's dealing with. The people are there. They're constantly listening for, okay, what does he say that hadn't been said before? Or what does he say about what we thought before? Of course, they naturally, a little more than we do, they're naturally comparing the past. They're comparing the old law. He's coming to something new. And they're continually this comparing. In verse 14, it says, the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, also heard all these things, and they derided him. Because the Pharisees loved, your blank there's loved, money, they took exception to Jesus' teaching. Now, this is a very important point, a very important part of Jesus' ministry. Jesus knows exactly what's happening with these men. He knows exactly what they're teaching. He knows exactly what they're representing. All the things that are happening as far as the Pharisees are concerned. He knows that they're one of the largest, if not the largest, Jewish sects, the groups of the Jews as far as that's concerned. And they're highly respected, and they demand respect and honor as far as their sect is concerned. But Jesus also knows their hearts and what's happening with their hearts. We live in an age that measures people's worth by how much money they make. And so this is very applicable for us today because the tendency in our society and in the world is to measure people's worth by how much money they got. What they're worth is what we say. And it's incredible how this affects people's lives, their spirituality, their growth, things that are happening, their influence as far as that's concerned. Because we're so impressed by financial things and money and what's happening as far as money is concerned. Number 3, but do we laugh at the warnings? Your blank there's warnings against serving money. Sometimes people scoff at these kinds of things and make fun of it, and all the things as far as money is concerned. But there's warnings. He says, I'm warning you about this thing as far as money is concerned. Now, to overcome and deal with and be what Jesus wants us to be as far as financial things are concerned is to be aware of the tendency or the temptation of, and how easy it is to fall in the trap of this and let it control. He's not saying that, like we talked about last week, he's not saying money is good or evil. It's the love of money. What is money doing as far as we're concerned? How impressed are we by financial things? And how much does it affect our lives on a daily basis as far as it's concerned? Do we try to explain them away? The next phrase is, do we try to explain it away? Go, no, wait a minute. This is the way this has to be as far as that's concerned. You'll notice our society is leaning further and further towards karma. Karma. I don't know if you know what karma is or not. You may think you know and you might not know as far as it's concerned. Eastern religions are big on karma, but American religion is becoming big on karma. Karma just simply means you get what you get because you do what you do. If you're getting a lot, it's because you're doing great, you see. If you're not getting anything, that's because you're evil and you're bad, you see. Karma, that's what it believes. That's what it believes. You get what you deserve as far as that's concerned. Well, karma is not Christianity. Karma is the opposite of Christianity. We're not about Christianity. Jesus is saying, here's the thing. You might not have anything, but you're of great value. You're of great value as far as God is concerned. Of course, we'll study that in our next story, our next event, as far as the rich man and Lazarus, you know, and the whole thing about that. Because society goes, no wonder. And people who live under karma think, no wonder we have it bad because we're evil. We're bad people. The good people are wealthy and they're rich and they have lots of things. Now be careful about karma because it eases into society and people get to thinking these kind of things and talking to each other about this. No wonder they're doing so well. Look how righteous they are, how good they are. No wonder they're doing so bad because look how evil they are. And that's not what Christianity, in fact, Jesus is teaching the opposite of that. He's going, no, wait a minute. Just because somebody's rich doesn't mean they're evil or that they're good. Just because somebody's poor doesn't mean they're evil or good. And that's what he's going against. He's going against the idea of, and it's very prominent in Eastern religions. It's become more prominent in our society as far as concerned. Number 5, do we apply them to someone else? The Pharisees, for example. Okay, when we think about these principles, do we just say, well, this is just what everybody else does. We don't do these kind of things. Be careful because we can ease into this way of thinking if we're not careful, especially for our family, people around us, we're surrounded by, society's by, try to make us think these are the way people think as far as money is concerned. So we need to be careful about the way we judge things and people by their money. Unless we take Jesus' statement seriously, you next make there seriously, we may be acting like the Pharisees ourselves. So unless we take him seriously and go, wait a minute, it's not about their money or lack of, you see. These people are special because they have a soul. They're special because they're special to God. They're special because Christ died for them, you see. It's easy for us to weigh out and get thinking the opposite of what Jesus said. No, they're special because the world thinks they've got a lot. They're rich, they're valued, as far as that's concerned. If you've traveled out of the United States very much at all, you'd know that the rest of the world sees us as the special ones. We're the blessed ones. We've got it. We've got it all made according to them. Even their rich people think we're better off than they. All these kinds of things. They weigh us out by, well, look how prosperous we are. After World War II, everything changed with a lot of countries, especially with Japan, because of what happened with the Japanese and things of that nature. But one of the major things that happened was they realized, they got to thinking, we don't think this way, but this is the way they think. We need to study what their gods are, and we need to worship their gods so we can win wars from now on. That's the way the world thinks. What are our gods? Well, when they studied us, they didn't find out our God was Jehovah God. What they found out was, to them, our God is industry. Industry. Get industry going. And the more industry you have, and the more stronger your nation is, the more likely you'll win a war, you see. And so sometimes we don't realize how the rest of the world sees us. But also, sometimes we don't realize how we're easing into the thinking of the rest of the world. So Jesus said, be careful about this. Don't think like the Pharisees. And don't think they're the only ones who have the wrong kind of thinking as far as concerned. Verse 15. And he said to them, you are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts. For what is rightly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of God. Now, Jesus doesn't just flippantly say this. He goes into depth on it. He says, look at this. Think about this. This is the way God sees things. You've got to see things the way God sees things. If you don't, you fall into man's way of thinking. The Pharisees acted piously to get praise from others. But God knew, you next blank there, knew what was in their hearts. They acted like they were better than anybody else because they wanted to be treated like they was better than anybody else. And to a large degree, they were treated during Jesus' time better than anybody else. Oh, there's a Pharisee. Look at them. They're so great and wonderful. Even if they didn't say it, they're thinking, these are the Pharisees. But God knew their hearts. God knew their hearts. Now, as Christians, for us to be rational, for us to be spiritual, for us to be like Jesus, we got to go, no, wait a minute. It is not about the outward appearance. You notice how impressed we are with the outward appearance? Look how this looks. We're impressed with the outward appearance. God said, no, I'm not impressed with your outward appearance. He doesn't say look good or bad. He said, I'm impressed with your heart. Now, the more we become like Jesus, the more we're impressed by the things Jesus is impressed with. Jesus was not impressed with the outward appearance of the Pharisees. That didn't impress him. In fact, he flips it around and he goes, no, wait a minute. God knows really what they're doing and why they're doing this. But he's impressed with the what? The heart. There's an old song, we don't have it in our song book, but an old song I grew up singing and listening to over and over. How about your heart was the name of the song. Is it right with God? That's the thing that counts today. On a daily basis as Christians, and what Jesus is saying here, what about your heart? Where's my heart? Is my heart being drawn up in the world and things of the world and the way the world thinks, or is my heart right with God? What about other people? What about their hearts? Where are they as far as their hearts are concerned? A lot of the outward things we're seeing with people is because their hearts are not right. I'll tell you about the lady that I counseled, 5 years ago. Sat in my office, went over the whole thing about her daughter. My daughter's doing all these horrible, immoral, terrible things that her daughter was doing. People she was hanging with, places she's going, bars she's going, all these things she's going on. And she says, it's the last. She said, but anyway, even having said all that, she's got a good heart. I said, no, lady, your daughter does not have a good heart. Well, you don't even know her. I said, well, what all you said about her tells me she doesn't have a good heart. Why not? Why do you think that? I said, because people who have good hearts don't do the things your daughter's doing. I want to feel like, I know I can understand as a parent you want to feel it, but that's not right. When these things are happening, that's coming out of a contaminated heart. Our heart's not right. It's amazing how fooled we are about people and things that are going on. What about the heart? All these outward things you're seeing are a reflection of the heart. That's what Jesus said here. The Pharisees were all about the outward things, but God is going, but what about your heart? Think about your heart. They resisted Jesus. They resented Jesus because he went right to the root of the problem. Pharisees considered their wealth to be a sign of God's approval. Pharisees considered their wealth to be a sign of God's approval. Many people in the world today consider the same thing. Look how wealthy you are. God's got to be approved. No. That's not the way God approves of people. It's not about having or not having, you see. But we can go, oh, God must be approving. Look how wealthy I am, how well I'm doing, It's amazing how that's gone through generations. And it's not just now, it's back then at that time. These people are thinking karma. They got to be great because look what they've got. And God's going, no, here's the thing. This is deceiving. God detested, your next blank there is detested their wealth because it caused them to abandon true spirituality. God detested these people's wealth because, no, it's a bad thing. It's a horrible thing. That doesn't mean wealth is a bad thing. He's going, they're using what they have to make claims that they're not true. They're going against their spirituality. True wealth is spirituality. True wealth is being right with God. True wealth is having the right kind of heart. So we need to examine our hearts. Now, the big challenge for us is, compared to the rest of the world, most of us are filthy rich. Filthy rich. You see how easy it is to be deceived and think, because we're rich, we must be right. God says, no, the Pharisees weren't right, and there's a good possibility you might not be. Don't be fooled by wealth or the lack of, you see. So many times it's so deceiving. And the sad part about it is, it starts as little children. Early on. Our little children pick up on this early on. We're the blessed ones, or we're the cursed ones, you see. We're the good ones, or we're the bad ones, you see. And God said, no. Here's the thing. It all boils down to your spirituality. Is God number one in my life? This is something I ask myself often, almost daily. Is God really number one in my life? Or am I just talking a talk? See, I have a fear of, because I've seen it so often, saying it so much that we get to thinking it's true. No, just because we're saying it, just because I say it, doesn't make it true. Is really and truly God number one in my life? Well, if He is, I'm not putting anything before God. Anything I put before Him, any entertainment, anybody else in the family, anything as far as wealth is concerned, anything as far as my pride, He says, no, when I'm number one, everything else is secondary to that. If He's not number one, He's not going to be in the parade. He's not going to be part of it. God's going to be number one. Prosperity may earn people's praise, but it must never substitute for commitment and service to God. Prosperity may earn people's praise. You may have experienced it. I've experienced it. It's amazing how many people just, if I just had what you got, if I just had what you got, earns people's praise. Well, that feeds our ego. That feeds our pride. But it must never take place of commitment and service to God. It's not wrong to prosper. It's not wrong to have. Don't misunderstand me this morning, you see. But more important than that is commitment and service. Am I really committed to, this is one thing I'm hearing often, and I don't think it's just this generation like some people are thinking. I think it goes for generation. I think it's generational. I think for several generations people have had a lack of commitment. What is commitment? What is constrained commitment? Are we really committed to God? Are we really committed to our mates? Are we really committed to doing the right thing, you see? Commitment. It's almost become a joke, people's commitment. Am I really committed to it? Well, one way we can know whether we're committed to it is, what am I willing to sacrifice for it? We're committed to what we're willing to sacrifice for. If we're not willing to sacrifice for it, we're not committed to it, no matter what it is. The commitment's huge. And then, of course, service to God. Am I serving Him? And not just the things I've always been doing. Am I trying to find new, different ways that I can serve Him even better? Physically, financially, socially, spiritually. How can I serve Him? What else is there I can do? We have a list we hand out to people to come to the congregation here of things of service they can do. You go back and really look at the list. See what you've signed up for. What else is there you can sign up for now? Everything from serving the pantry, working the pantry, to work as far as the worship service is concerned, to deliver Meals on Wheels, all these things that are, and I've got to commend you people. For the most part, you people are great in this. It's astounding. It's amazing to me how willing you are. I hear people are doing things all the time that are not even called on to do, but willing to step up and do it. Well, that's showing commitment. That's going to rate them. Am I committed? Am I really of service to this thing? At the end of the day, that's what God is looking for. And then Luke 16 and 17, the law and the prophets were until John. Since that time, the kingdom of God has been preached, and everyone is pressing into it. And it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one tittle of the law to fail. Now, this is an important point that he's making here as far as our lesson's concerned, but not only our lesson, but also to understand as far as the Bible's concerned, Old Testament, New Testament. John the Baptist ministry was the dividing, next blank there's dividing line between Old and New Testament. So when John comes, everything up until John the Baptist, when he comes, this is the dividing line. Everything he's doing is going, okay, now then you're seeing the difference in the Old Testament and the New Testament, the old law and the new law. And this is a very difficult time for people because most of these people, the Jews, were very acquainted with. In fact, I don't think sometimes we realize how acquainted and how closely they were on a daily basis to the law. Memorizing the law, understanding the law, keeping the law, realizing what the law is, checking the law, double check. And then John the Baptist shows up on the scene. Of course, the last thing that God says in Malachi is watch out for this one. This one's coming, like unto Elijah. And he's going to be teaching these things. He's the one coming. So 400 years before, he says, watch out for this one. And then 400 years later, Zechariah, the priest, is saying, in the temple, first thing he says, here he is. He's on the scene. He's come. And of course, John the Baptist was the man. He's the one bringing the new law in. More things change. They think that as far as history is concerned, not ever has many people's lives changed as during the time of John the Baptist time, because they're repenting. They're turning away from the old stuff to the new stuff, preparing their minds. God's preparing their minds with John. John 1, 15 through 18 is a very important text for us. John 1:15. John bore witness of him and cried out, saying, "This was he of whom I say, he who came after me is preferred before me, for he was before me. And of his fullness we have all received the grace for grace. For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him." So at this point, he's saying, okay, I'm going to explain to you about John. Here's what's happened as far as John's concerned. Here's what's happened as far as the old law is concerned, as far as that's concerned. John was not the new system. Your blank there's new. John, not a new system, but the culmination of the old. John is not presenting the new. He's culminizing or finishing up the old. He says, this is what the old was about. This is its purpose. This is what it had to do. Now then, get ready for the new. The same God who worked through Moses was working through Jesus. So as John is coming, preparing the way, the Bible talks about John preparing the way for Jesus. He's preparing the way, turning the people's minds toward Jesus and going, okay, here's the new way. Look out for the new way. The same God who worked through Moses is working now through Jesus. We're going to turn it over to Jesus as far as concerned. Hebrews 10, verse 9 says, Then he said, "Behold, I have come to do your will, O God." He takes away the first, and he has established the second. So here in Hebrews, it's referring to Jesus is taking away the old and giving the new, establishing the second. All new now, as far as the way is concerned. Now, I don't think we appreciate what a huge mindset this is, because all the time before this, for hundreds of years, some 1,600 years, the law of Moses was in effect for 1,600 years. The patriarchal age was in effect for 2,500 years. Then the Ten Commandments were given. When 10 Commandments came, for 1,600 years till Jesus died on the cross, they were under the law of Moses, the old law. For all that time, the thing that had been pressed upon the Jews was, got to keep this law. Remember the law. Memorize the law. Repeat the law. Keep the law before you. And they did, as best they knew how, as best they could. And even at that, is a poor job of it. But at the same time, the law was always there. That was what before them. It was preached to them, was taught to them, was shared with them, and things of that nature. Keeping and following the law. And then John comes and said, okay, now then, that's done. Now there's a new way coming. Be prepared for the new way. Now, it's hard for us because we've all been all raised under and lived under the new law. We've never known anything as far as the old law is concerned. It's not been about the Old Testament, the old law as far as it's concerned. But for them, this is a huge change. It's like if today you've been raised like I have in the church, my parents were in the church, my grandparents in the church, my great-grandparents, and all of a sudden somebody says, now then, you're not going to do this anymore. We have a whole new religion for you. A whole new thing. Would that be hard for you? It'd be hard for me, because I'm thinking, but this is not the way I see it. This is not the way I've been taught. This is not the right thing. You see. Even though if it was, and there's not going to ever be, because this is the last thing, but if it was, this goes so against the grain, because, well, that was the difference in law and grace and love. When I was going to school, I've told you before, my professors wouldn't allow us to call it the new law, you see. If you call it the new law, they'd say you got to call it the law of love, the law of grace. The old law was keeping the commands. Here's your list. The new law is that difference. It's a whole new mindset of, here's the way that you do. The amazing thing about it is, once you really get it, you really understand the new law, you realize it's much more demanding than the old law was. The old law is physically, about the physical. You make the sacrifice, you do the physical things, and you're in good shape. The new law is that's what we're studying here today. It's not just about the physical, it's about your heart. It's about your heart. You do the right thing, but you got to be loving people when you do it. You see, you serve, but you got to be loving when you do it. You worship, but you got to be loving when you do it. You see, you give, but you got to be gracious when you give it. All these things are. He said, now then. None of that makes any difference to me unless your heart is right. So how much do we check and think about our hearts? That's what I encourage you. during the singing today, as we sing the songs, think about it. Is this what I mean? Do I understand what I'm saying? Does this come from my heart? As we pray the prayers, as we take the Lord's Supper, as we study, be examined in your heart. Does this come from my heart, or am I just going through a ritual? Am I just saying the things, Saw a story years ago, kind of a cartoon kind of thing. This whole congregation was singing a song. Song leader was singing a song. They liked the song. They were singing the song. And a little boy in the back row was singing another song. He was standing up back there with his mama singing, Jesus Loves Me. And the only one God was hearing was the little boy in the back row. He was singing with all his heart that Jesus loved him. Well, the moral of the story is we can be singing at the top of our lungs and every note, everything's perfect and all the words, but if it's not coming from our heart, God doesn't hear it. In fact, to him, it's an abomination. Is your heart into it? That's all he's talking about right here. What about our hearts? Be careful to judge other people too quickly if our hearts are not into it. We're as bad as off as they are. And then verse 18, Luke 16:18. Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. And whoever marries her who's divorced from her husband commits adultery. Now at this point, Jesus is going, okay, here's the thing as far as marriage is concerned, a very controversial subject, a very difficult subject, a thing that they were wondering about at that time. And a lot of things people misunderstand at that time. And of course, at this time, many people misunderstand. Most religious leaders of Jesus' day permitted, next month there's permitted, a man divorce his wife for any reason. In the old law, the way they did it, the way things was going, they'd say, okay, whatever the reason you want to get rid of her, just get rid of her. It's not a big deal for us, permitted for any reason. Jesus' teaching about divorce went beyond Moses. Now, it's not the same as Moses. Jesus said, okay, that was for a period of time. And God allowed those things for a period of time. Don't misunderstand that. You'll hear verses in the Old Testament about that. But now then, he says, here's the new. In Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4, this is what the old law was really about. When a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanliness in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand, he sends her out of his house. When she has departed from his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, if the latter husband detests her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts her out and puts it in her hand and sends her out of the house, or if the latter husband dies who took her as his wife, then her former husband who divorced her must not take her back as his wife after she has been defiled. For that is the abomination before God, the Lord. And you shall not bring sin on the land, which the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance. And so he's laying down the law here as far as marriage and divorce is concerned, according to Moses' law and what happens. And this is what they lived under. Stricter than any of the then current schools of thought, Jesus' teachings shocked. Your next blank there, shocked his hearers, just as they are shocked today. It shocks his hearers today. So now Jesus is turning this whole thing of the old law is put away, and this is what's happened. And then he turns to marriage, divorce, remarriage. He says, okay, here's the thing. Now they're listening closely to this because they know what Deuteronomy 24 says. They've heard this. They've gone over this. They've shared this. They've weighed these things out with each other. They've listened to teachings as far as concerned. And then Jesus said, but here's the thing. Here's the thing. This is what God allows. This is what it is in the new law, as far as new law is concerned. And so people are shocked. Have you ever heard or been someplace somebody taught something, and you're going, no, that's not what I understand the Bible to say. And, wait a minute. Could this possibly be something I didn't realize? Is there something else going on here? It's amazing how so many religions in the world can preach from the same Bible and come up with different kinds of things. You've heard it just like I have. You can almost make the Bible say anything. You work things around, But then Jesus says, okay, this is what you've heard. This is what's been taught. This is what the law's been. You've heard these things. You've gone over these things. You've gone over these things many times. And yet, he says, here's the thing. And he shocks them. He says, here's the way it is as far as it's concerned. Matthew 19:10 says, his disciples said to him, if such is the case of a man with a woman, it is better not to marry. They say, if this is the case, you'd be better off not to get married to begin with, if this is the way it is. He didn't say anything. He goes, wait a minute. He didn't say you misunderstood this. He goes, well, that may be the case as far as it's concerned. It may be better off not to marry than to marry and do the wrong thing as far as God is concerned. Jesus, in no uncertain terms, Jesus says in no uncertain terms that marriage is a lifetime, your next month there's a lifetime commitment. Now this is where the rub comes in our society today. People say the words, and people think the thoughts, and all these kind of things, but really when you get right down to it, it's kind of a, well, this is really an optional. No. Jesus is saying this is a lifetime commitment. I wonder, even as I'm studying these lessons, these things, is this what we teach? I'm not talking about from the pulpit necessarily. It might be from or Sunday school. Is this what we're teaching our children and our grandchildren and society? Or do we just kind of go, yeah, well, it's just kind of however it is? You know as well as I do, or maybe better than I do, I don't know, the horrible state our country's in because of marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Well, who's at fault? I don't know that it even pays to blame somebody. I just think if we don't go back and go, wait a minute, what does God want? What does God want? And if we don't do what God wants and go, wait a minute, what does He want? Then we're going to come up with anything and everything. I have worn myself out, people, more than once, more than twice, more than 3 times, going through this, going through the books. I've read stacks of books on this. One book says this, one book says that. And you get this one idea and one idea, I'm going, oh, how's a guy supposed to know? How can we be for sure and for certain? There's only one way. What Jesus say? If you do what Jesus said, whoever does, anybody else does what Jesus, if I do what Jesus said, you're safe. If we don't do what Jesus says, we're in a risky position. Whoever it is, whatever it is, you see. But it's amazing how somehow we want to go, wait a minute, but He didn't really mean, yeah, He did. He says exactly what He means. It means exactly what He says. And yet somehow we want to go, well, wait a minute, maybe there's something else. No, what He's saying here is what we just read. Jesus says in no uncertain terms that marriage is lifetime commitment. Lifetime commitment. Is that what we're impressing on each other? With our teaching, with our lifestyle, with our attitude, with our, or well, maybe we'll, maybe don't, 50% plus, over 1 out of 2 marriages in the United States fail. But you go back and go, well, when did that start? What's happened with that? It's got progressively worse through years. What's got it progressively worse? Because of lack of teaching. Back when they taught it, you see, very little, hardly any at all. And then it's got to where more and more. And amazing how that it's just accepted this way it is. But I think the saddest part about it is not what happens to a couple. I think the saddest part about it is what happens to the children. If you've been in that kind of a family, if you've experienced that, you know what I'm talking about. It breaks my heart to see what broken families doing to our children. It's incredible. It's one of the saddest things. So if for no other reason, and I've heard people say, well, we stayed together because of our children. Well, that's good enough. The children deserve it. They deserve to be taught. They deserve the example to be there. The example is to go, wait a minute. This is a lifetime deal, no matter what. My mother and father made lots of mistakes. Probably like your mother and father, I don't know. But they admitted it. They knew it. They didn't know what they was doing. All that. But one thing they did, there's 5 of us children alive. 1 passed on. They impressed upon us, no matter what, when you marry, you do it for a lifetime. 1 time and 1 time only. That's what they did. So far, that's what we've done. They impressed that upon us. Well, is it getting to be so old-fashioned? We go, well, it's not that. Yeah, are we impressing that? You see, I think it's not about the church. I think it's about the home. I think it's about the family. Are we impressing this upon our, does it even matter? Jesus, it matters. Impress upon them and help them realize this lifetime. To leave your spouse for another person may be legal, but it's adultery in God's eyes. When we leave somebody for somebody else, it may be legal. People get by with it legally as far as it's concerned. But as far as God's concerned, He says it's adultery. As you think about marriage, I don't know how our time is doing. You guys might go ahead and hand out the next lesson. If y'all want to do that, go ahead and hand out the next lesson as far as it's concerned, you guys. As you think about marriage, remember that God intends it to be a permanent, you next make their permanent commitment. God's intention for marriage is a permanent commitment. And then I just put there what you've heard so many times, almost every wedding, till death do us part. Till death do us part. Every time I do a wedding, I slow down that part. Every time I do premarital counseling, I slow down that part. And I go, here's the thing. Till death do us part. I don't think most people have any idea what they're getting into. I'm going to do this till death do us part, till one of us dies. It's amazing how that God has said, here's what you do. That overcomes, that deals with a lot of things, helps us overcome a lot of things as far as life's concerned, because He wants to be a permanent commitment. And then we go to Luke 16, 19 through 31. What Jesus says about life after death. What Jesus says about life after death. Each one of these lessons, He said, this is a game changer. This is a life changer as far as how we view these things, life after death. Luke 16, 19 through 31. Now there was a rich man, and he habitually dressed in purple and fine linen, joyously living in splendor every day. And a poor man named Lazarus was laid at his gate, covered with sores, and longing to be fed with the crumbs which were falling from the rich man's table. Besides, even the dogs were coming and licking his sores. Now the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and saw Abraham afar away, and Lazarus in his bosom. Verse 24. And he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, so that he may dip his tip of his finger in the water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames. Verse 25. But Abraham said, Child, remember that during your lifetime you received the good things, and likewise Lazarus bad things. And now he is being comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between you and us and you, there is a great chasm fixed, so that those who wish to come over from here to you, will not be able, and that none may cross from there to us. Verse 27. And he said, I beg you, Father, that you send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, in order that he may warn them, so that they will be able to also not come to this place of torment. And Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, for if someone goes to them from the dead, he will repent. And he said to him, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not listen to and be persuaded, even if someone rises from the dead. There's lots of controversy about this parable or this story. Some people think it's a parable. Some people think it's a really true life story that happened as far as Jesus is concerned. He knew the people and things of that nature. Jesus is talking to people who love money. Now, keep this in context, because he said, okay, now, he's right along the line of all these things as far as these people who love money, the Pharisees, and the teaching he's done as far as marriage, divorce, and marriage is concerned. He continues to follow on with this. He's trying to get them to think spiritually. Think about what's at risk here and how important this is. We see things rightly instead of the way other people have seen things. They sneered about the use of money and to gain friends. They made fun of that as far as concerned, and not being covetous. And they're saying that doesn't mean anything as far as concerned. This could have been a true life story or parable. Nevertheless, it illustrates the truth. So it doesn't matter whether it's a true life story or parable. I've known brethren who got at odds about this. And it became a test of fellowship about whether it's a parable or a true life story. It doesn't matter. Getting the point is what matters as far as that's concerned. He's trying to teach a point, prove point here. This is not a very popular story with the world. The world doesn't like this story. A story of a successful businessman who failed before God. So the world doesn't appreciate this story. And it's amazing how that we want to think, because of karma, if he's a successful businessman, he's got to be successful as far as God's concerned. And God said, no, here's the thing. It's just the opposite, as I referred to a while ago. The people of Jesus that Jesus was speaking to were very much like this man. And so he's talking to people, the Pharisees, and people who think in terms just like this man. This could be like somebody today, this kind of story. If you have a big house, and kids in private school, place at the lake, all equipped with all the toys to play on the lake with, Cadillac, Rolls Royce, custom van, RV at the door, all the kind of things to drive. A Learjet will be delivered to you next week so that you can fly around the world, do things. Seat at the 50-yard line, reserved for 5 years. Invitation to the White House has been confirmed, so you can go up there and talk to the president and all the political people. Your accounts say that your investments are doing great. Your accountants saying all these things are doing wonderful. The governor wants you to come and be on a select committee as far as that's concerned and serve in that political way. But God says, you're a big phony. To hell with you. That hits pretty hard. Then all the things we want to do and the things people do and all the things to be successful, and God says, no. It's not about that at all. Well, if it's not about this, what is it about? That's the question. What is life about? And it's not just because we're getting older. No matter what age you are, what is life? The sooner we realize what life is really all about, the better off we are as far as God's concerned. And the more we are secure as far as eternity is concerned. Jesus describes two scenes here. One on earth and one after life is over for certain. The purpose, your first blank there, purpose of the story. Now we've got to get the purpose of the story. Why is he describing these things? To show proper use of earthly things. This is one of our greatest temptations. He says, think about this. Realize what's happening. This is the proper use of earthly things. He doesn't say don't have things. He says, what's the proper use of things? Well, the proper use gets back to the proper thinking. Do I think properly about things? I've got the right attitude as far as things go. Proper use of opportunities, not just things, but am I taking advantage of my opportunities? You see, when you really get this story, all of a sudden certain things become very urgent. I got to do this now. And other things are not so important at all. If you've never read the little book, Tyranny of the Urgent, The Tyranny of the Urgent, it's a great lesson. It's a spiritual lesson. Because the urgent pulls Christians away from the really important things. And the whole little book is about that. What are the important things? The tyranny of the urgent. Well, right here God is saying, don't miss the urgent, the important things. Jesus says, a man who uses his goods in a good way will have friends and to greet them in heaven. As we use these things in a proper way, things are all the things we have in a proper way. These are the people we'll meet in heaven, or helping them get to heaven, because we're using our material things to help them. And we'll begin there next week, the Lord's willing, on number 3. Thank you for being with us today.